Jai Hind, Jai Bharat, and welcome to Dev Talks. This is Aadi. As you all can see, I have with me someone really special, Professor Madhav Nalapat, who's a renowned voice as far as China and, of course, many other issues is concerned. I have followed the professor when he started talking about China since, years ago, and I've been reading about what he had to say with regards this mysterious country on the northern border. Of course, the interest goes up as China comes and threatens our safety and security, and we need to know a little more. Sir, firstly, good evening and welcome to the show, sir.
Jai Hind.
Thank you, sir. Sir, today I wanted to talk about their positioning. They seem to be repositioning themselves in terms of the place of China in global affairs. Just at an outset, how do you see the Chinese kind of trying to refit themselves, if I may, uh, to to kind of get inside that particular groove that they feel is empty for the world today?
Well, look, China has always regarded itself as special. Now you saw that playing out even in the 1950s between Mao Zedong and the post-Stalin Soviet leadership. I don't think Mao wanted to challenge Stalin because Stalin was very mercurial and Stalin was a gambler. But certainly post-Stalin, he basically challenged the USSR and said that they are capitalist roaders. They're actually capitalists posing as communists. So the fact is that from the Chinese point of view, they've always been the special people in the world. And the success of the Chinese Communist Party, right from the time right from the time Mao took over in the late 1930s, established more and more control, is to position themselves to the Chinese people as saying, we share this dream of yours, the China dream, that China will be number one, that the Chinese people, in other words, the Han people, will be once again the top ethnic group in the world. And more importantly, we are the only party, and this is the only leadership that can lead you to that promised land. So you follow us, you'll reach the promised land. You don't follow us, you try and get rid of us, then what happens is you get lost and the Chinese dream will never be fulfilled. The
That's
Communist
interesting,
Party
sir.
has had remarkable success in selling this to a huge number of ordinary Han people.
That's very interesting that you, in the first answer itself, you talk about the Soviet Union. Uh, I want to take up the Russia China game right at the beginning, sir. This was pretty impactful, especially in the West. People kind of took, took notice to this particular meeting. There is also this philosophical saying that talks about ally with the Wu in the East to beat the Wei in the North. And that is what they had done to the Soviet Union by allying with America to kind of beat the Soviet Union. Today, we see a complete opposite of it, where they are allying with a post-Soviet state, which is Russia, to beat the Americans. How do you see this game of we and we actually playing forward, sir?
Uh, Please see my front page story in Sunday Guardian this Sunday. That is the 7th of May. Please have a look at it, and it's completely contrary to what the conventional wisdom is, that China and Russia are allied together against the United States. The reality is China wants to see Russia in a subsidiary position. It
Yes.
wants to see Russia continuously in a weakened position and depending on China. They do not want to see a Russia that is fully empowered because they are still got that dread of Russia. Russia is a country that is really, at different times in the past, they have wreaked havoc with Chinese warlords and Chinese, imperial regimes. And they are very nervous about that. The Chinese never forget history. So, from that point of view, please read that because what I have sketched out there, based on the information given to me, oh, actually, completely given to me around 6 weeks ago, if I may say so. And I've just been testing that on different points of time from February, March of last year. And finally, I came to a conclusion okay, the people who are speaking to me, they're very well regarded people obviously, I am never going to reveal any particular source or the method that we have of communication, which, I mean, it's not rocket science, but it's not something that normally people will come across. But I finally said, okay, I think this is the correct hypothesis. It's got enough weight for me to put my name on it and write about it. I talked about Cold War 2.0, you remember. And till today, people are arguing, oh, there's no Cold War 2.0. The Chinese are saying that, the Americans are saying that, everybody's saying that. I've been saying that for many years, that there is Cold War 2.0. And the next book that is going to come out from, my book is going to come out through Penguin, and that is going to come out in the beginning of August. It's called Cold War 2.0. So I stand by what I said several years ago, that Cold War 2.0 is on us. The American policymakers may not have realized it, but anyone having some idea of China and the thinking of the Chinese leadership would have understood that they have fully internalized this situation of Cold War 2.0, and all their actions are basically motivated with that particular knowledge and that drive to win this new Cold War. What my point was in Sunday Guardian, based on the inputs that I've got, and as I told you, it took me 6 weeks before I could fully go ahead with writing the story. And I think some of the people who spoke to me were not very happy about my long silence. Some thought that I had, in a sense, opted out for fear of basically saying something which could provoke in both Washington and Beijing, and of course Moscow. I mean, you provoke one, you're in trouble. You provoke all three, you're in deep trouble. But the reality is, I was just mulling over what they said in my mind, going and over again, pointing to the data points that they were, throwing at me, and finally convinced myself that yes, I think this is worth a public outing. Let's put it that way. Uh, the point is that according to the individuals I've spoken to, Joe Biden has, in a sense, cut an implicit deal with Xi Jinping. And that implicit deal is, we are concerned about Ukraine. And frankly, both the Europeans and the Americans and the Canadians all seem to be more concerned about Ukraine than they are with the rest of the world outside the West put together, and Russia put together. They're obsessed with Ukraine. And the deal is that China will restrain Russia in a very subtle way, nothing overt, nothing public, not at all, but possibly private discussions between Xi Jinping and Putin. Because you can see now, over the last 4.5 months, for example, miscellaneous Russian commanders, miscellaneous what do we call nationalist Russian voices, have been openly voicing their discontent at the way the military is behaving. The reality is, they are voicing their discontent with Vladimir Putin because they believe that Vladimir Putin is holding them back. And definitely, these are people who are very objective people. The Wagner, boss Prigozhin, he is a very rational actor, and he 2 3 times he's thrown what can only be described as a tantrum.
Yeah.
And there must be some good reason behind that. He's not the kind of man who will throw a tantrum based on a fantasy. There must be good reason. And in essence, what he's saying is, my group, which is the most successful in dealing with the Ukrainians, is being sabotaged by the Russian military. Now, this ties in with what has been said, that Xi Jinping is putting brakes on Putin so that the response to provocations by Ukraine, and of course, behind Ukraine, NATO, including, for example, Nord Stream 2, very clearly it was done by some of Ukraine's friends, possibly not Ukrainian involvement. They probably want to keep Ukrainian fingers clean there at
Clean.
least, but definitely they did it. But the fact is, the response of Putin, even on an attack on the Kremlin. I mean, the response so far has been, you know, if I may say so, some of the past leaders of India would have given exactly that kind of a response. I mean, if you put it that way, you one slap you give, I smile, give one more slap, I smile even more, and you keep smiling until the person stops slapping. Well,
Yeah.
frankly, the reality is that Putin is under pressure. Xi Jinping is doing what is considered by him, and I think the by the standing committee of the Politburo, to be a policy of ensuring that neither side wins in this war. Russia will not get the 23% of Ukrainian territory, which it has seized from 2014 onwards, frankly, and which is now trying to firm up its presence on. And America will not get the victory over Russia in terms of Russia being thrown out or Russian pro Russian groups being thrown out of that 23% of Ukrainian land. What we are seeing is a classic stalemate. You know, you saw that in the if you in the First World War. You had, you know, millions of soldiers fighting, untold hundreds of thousands of soldiers dying, and the change in positions were often a few feet,
Yeah.
a few yards, sometimes extraordinarily a few miles. The front was completely static,
Yeah.
and yet so many hundreds of thousands of soldiers died on both the Allied and the Prussian. Frankly,
Absolutely.
Prussia was the driving force at that point in time in Germany, and the Prussian side. So many hundreds of thousands, not to forget the millions who died as a consequence of Russia, Tsarist Russia, you know, going against Prussia and basically being defeated to such an extent that the Tsarist regime collapsed and you had the
Collapsed.
Bolsheviks take over. And the Bolshevik slogan was peace and land. And they signed a humiliating peace deal with the Prussians. But Lenin knew that that's what the Russian people wanted. They wanted peace, peace at any price. And he was the only party basically demanding that. You had Alexander Kerensky coming on the promise of peace. Very soon, Kerensky joined the war.
Yeah.
And when that happened, the tide turned towards Lenin and the Bolsheviks, who held firm to this very unpopular view that you should have peace with the aggressor. In other words, peace with Prussia. So, so the point is very simple. You're seeing in Ukraine today a stalemate. And the reason is Xi Jinping wants this war to continue at least till mid or the close of 2014. Why? Because two things happen as a consequence of the war. One, Russia is completely dependent on China. People, the European countries, and some snide remarks in the Washington Post and the New York Times, all newspapers that frankly have very little to say about, you know, the immense volume of assistance, covert and overt, that is going to Russia. The idea is not that Russia win the war. The idea is the war be prolonged. Xi Jinping does not want Putin to win the war because that would make Putin a hero in large parts of the world. He does not want Ukraine to win the war, which will make him a popular man in the White House. He wants both sides to slug it out in a stalemate so that who gains? The whole theory of tertius gardens, the, the golden third, the
Hmm.
tertius gardens between NATO and Russia is China. So the NATO and Russia go into a stalemate. Ukraine is just the proxy for that stalemate. They both exhaust each other. And what is the benefit for China? The benefit is that NATO will become so exhausted. I mean, in terms even of military power, the amount of weapons that are being sent to Ukraine, they're openly saying that we are running out of weapons. Great from the point of view of the PLA. Wonderful. Where a stage will be reached at which NATO or the public in NATO countries will be too exhausted to react kinetically if China does one of two actions. And in my view, in both. The only question is which will come sooner, which will come later.
Later.
One of that is taking over of Taiwan. The other is that an attempt to take over Ladakh, Arunachal, parts of Bhutan, and and as well as handing over the large parts of Kashmir to Pakistan. This is one. So these are the two, if I may say so, goals of the PLA. These are the goals of Xi Jinping. And the question is not whether he will attempt it, but when and who will come first. Will it be Taiwan's turn or will it be our turn? But the reality is, anybody in either Taiwan or India who's fooling himself or herself that look, these guys are willing to have an accommodation, they're willing to have a peaceful resolution, and they're fooling themselves. Xi Jinping wants Ladakh. Xi Jinping wants Arunachal. Xi Jinping wants large chunks of Bhutan. He wants Pakistan to be gifted Kashmir, which basically means gifting himself, because Pakistan today has become an occupied country. You
Yeah.
know, if you talk about POK, I mean, it is basically it is COP, China occupied Pakistan. It's now an occupied country. So this is Xi Jinping's plan, and according to my information, and as I said quite honestly, let me again tell you again something that is not politically correct. I have immense regard for the Chinese people. I have immense respect for the Chinese Communist Party. I'm, well, you are, that's why occasionally CGTN, for example, calls me for interviews, and there are still ways of in which understanding what's going on in China. Some time back, I had pointed out that Xi Jinping was under attack inside China about 7, 8 months ago for being not helping Russia enough. Since then, he has ramped up a lot of help. Most of it is covert. The overt part is the financial help that Russia has got by the mass purchases of Russian oil, way more than what India has done, way, way more. Of course, there are other kinds of help. A lot of the equipment flowing through North Korea and Iran, according to some of my sources, is Chinese in origin, but I can't really confirm that. But this is what very knowledgeable sources have been telling me for about 6 to 7 months. Suddenly, you have North Korea emerging as surplus in weapons when it's itself under existential threat. Suddenly, you have Iran emerging as very bountiful in giving essential weapons. When you have got Iran having essentially an existential situation. I mean, it's not logical. And the reason why it's not logical is it's not their weapons. They are merely conduits. This is, I mean, there have been some data points that have been adduced as proof. I've looked through them. I can't say that they're wrong. I'm not confirming it's right, but it looks very likely that it's right. But the fact is, the Chinese are now aiming for a long stalemate in Ukraine. Putin is unfortunately, according to the people I've talked to, he is dependent on China globally. He sees himself as a global figure. He's now been, International Court of Justice and all kinds of, I mean, very amazing things. The International Court of Justice is calling a war criminal an individual who has got the largest, most deadly nuclear arsenal in the world. I don't know. Uh, See, the point that is being made is that whether it's a Kremlin attack, whether it's international court, whether it is all the multiple darts that are flung Putin's way, and the multiple attacks inside Russia of Ukrainian forces, covert forces, as well as Russians who are joining hands with the Ukrainians against Russia. It's all because the West has got a very great certainty that Uncle Xi is there to hold back Putin from a full-blooded response to this kind of, it's not even pinprick, dagger prick, stiletto prick, you know, from that Xi is there to hold them back. And in exchange, they're allowing Xi to get away with a lot in the Indo-Pacific. And of course, I mean, I think there's a very interesting site called China Uncensored, and
Hmm.
I think in the next few days they're going to carry my interview. It's a very, it's a, if I may say so, a site that there are three people running it, and they are doing an amazing job of really, as they say, is China Uncensored. So I simply asked them a question, as I recall. I think I don't know if I've asked you here also that. Just calculate what the United States has given Taiwan in terms of weaponry over the last 14 years. I'm not talking of free weaponry, weaponry at market prices, at high cost. And check what has been given to Ukraine over 14 months, free of cost. There's no comparison between the range of weapons, the quantity of weapons, the cost of weapons. In one case, cost borne by the US taxpayer. In the other case, cost borne by the Taiwanese taxpayer. And if you look at the difference in these 14 years, and this is one of the data points that are supplied to me by an individual, let me say that I'm telling the data points that are supplied by individuals to me. I mean, so I would like to give them credit, but of course, they are very clear that they should remain, I mean, unnamed, and I'm going to ensure that as I've always done. But it's a very instructive study. You should study how many $1 billion has been given to Taiwan in terms of lethal equipment, high class, high cost equipment, even at a cost. And you will find what has been given to Taiwan over 14 years is puny compared to what has been given to Ukraine over 14 months. Now, the geopolitical question is, and I've studied geopolitics for a little while here and there. I mean, uh, I've been, I mean, the Chancellor Manipal, Dr. Ramdas Pai, and the Vice Chancellor, Dr. Valiatan, at that point in time said, look, we have seen your writings, we have seen your talks, and at that point in time, you didn't have videos. So they would have either gone, some of them would have gone to the talk, and they would have reported back to them. We believe that India needs an attention to geopolitics because India has been called a country where there's no strategy. George Stanham, many people kept saying that. So we want you to come as India's first professor of geopolitics. And if I may say so, I accept it. This was back in the closing days of 98, I think is when this offer was made. Early days of 99 is when that my odyssey as a geopolitical, from journalism to academics began. But what I'm trying to say, frankly, is Taiwan is way more important. Forget about India. India is as way more important. But let's just talk about Taiwan. I don't want to talk about India. It's a sensitive subject. I've got my own views. I do strongly believe that we will defend ourselves and we'll give the Chinese a very tough time and push them back. But I'm not sure, but I mean, so let's not discuss that. Taiwan. Taiwan is much more important to US security,
Yes.
to NATO security, to Western security than Ukraine. The way the West is behaving, Ukraine is central to Western civilization. Without Ukraine, the whole of Europe will fall apart. It will come under the control of the Kremlin. For God's sake, Ukraine was under the control of the Kremlin up to 1991.
Yep.
What happened? Did the West fall apart? The Soviet Union fell apart. And for God's sake, I mean, what you're saying Putin is doing now. In 2014, that area of land was sliced away from Ukraine. What is all that's happening now is that my information from within uh, a few the contacts that I have in Russia is that the Russians got hard information that Ukraine was going to have an offensive by May, June
Yeah.
of 2022 to recapture the land that Russia had taken. And it was a preemptive move made by Putin. It was not what do I say, an offensive move, it was a defensive move to keep that land secure. Whether this is true or not, I don't know. No data points have been supplied to me, but this has been communicated to me. And these are again responsible people. I have respect for them. They said that by June, July of 2022, NATO had primed Ukraine to march into those areas on the assumption that Russia will not intervene.
Yeah.
possibly, and take them over, which would have been a disaster for a lot of the people in those areas. Because don't forget, in 2014, Ukraine banished the Russian language as an official language.
Yeah.
Only Ukrainian was put there. And they basically started treating Russians as second class citizens. So that began from 2014. So these areas got autonomy from that. And if they were to went back to Ukraine, there would be the same kind of situation taking place there as you're seeing in a neighboring country of Pakistan, where a certain military ran away and left lists of people who had helped them, and systematically those people are being eliminated, jailed, tortured, and abused systematically, going name by name on the list that has been left behind helpfully by a military that was fighting that the force that is now running that country. I mean that since 2001, since 2001, it has been fighting that force for 20 years, and this is what happened. So this could have happened in Ukraine as well, because you can see clearly there is a kind of a bloodlust that is there in Ukraine. I'm
Mm.
surprised to see it's there in the Western world also. It's there even in Joe Biden.
Yeah.
When it comes to Russia, when it comes to that 23%, Joe Biden is talking. I mean, like, I mean, look, Billy the Kid or something. He's there, all guns blazing to take
Yeah.
over. So the fact is that the point is that this obsession with Ukraine is, in the view of Xi Jinping, a great blessing to China. I've been saying this since around March, April 20, I mean, 20, 22. I think a lot more people have been saying it now, but even today, the received wisdom in Europe, in North America, is essentially that no, the received wisdom is completely different.
Yeah.
So I really don't know how to explain that situation, and basically understand why this attention is being given to Ukraine and making it such an existential issue, when the real existential issue in the Indo-Pacific is actually uh, Taiwan. So that is the point I wanted to basically say, Adi, based on the data point. So the point is, Xi Jinping's game is to make this World War One in miniature. I mean, not really in miniature. That war again was fought
It's
in Europe.
yeah. Yeah.
It was fought in Europe. It was fought involving European soldiers. And if you look at Russians, Ukrainian, there's European. It was a complete stalemate for more than 3 years, 3.5, 4 years, and hundreds of thousands of people died. Russia was weakened,
Yeah.
the Europeans were weakened, everybody was weakened there. And the same thing is what Xi Jinping and his military planners want to see happen in the Russia Ukraine conflict. They want both sides to be weakened. And their game they are playing, if you look at it, and I've got any number of data points, I'm very certain these data points are there in the US as well, in Europe as well, except that policymakers and academics there are onto this bloodlust against Russia. They're now gone back comfortably to Cold War 1.0. It's a
Yeah.
bloodlust against Putin. And they just won't read it. They won't see it properly. They don't understand what is going on there. And this is what is happening. So eventually, the calculation of the Chinese side is, in 18 months or so, possibly a little longer, a little less, the Western forces will be in such a state that even if we move aggressively on Taiwan, assuming, I think they'll probably wait until the presidential election and see if
Mhm.
they get somebody who they can play with. In that case, they may wait for a little longer. I don't know, provided the Ukraine war is still continuing, by the way, because their patience is dependent on the Ukraine war. They want that war to continue. If the war stops suddenly, and by a ceasefire on the line suggested by Narendra Modi, that you have a ceasefire on the lines that are there, the line of actual control, the line of
At the moment.
control.
Mm.
And
Mm.
that is the sensible thing to do. But if that happens, a different matter. It's never going to happen because of this bloodlust. So that is what they want, unfortunately. And that is what they're getting. And that is what Xi Jinping is doing in the case of Russia. He's weakening Russia, he's exhausting Russia, he's weakening the West, he's exhausting the West. In the process, Ukraine is being torn to shreds. But will Ukraine get upset? No, for two reasons. One, the oligarchs are well looked after by Chinese companies. And two, the Ukrainians know the Chinese are holding Putin back. They're they put him on a leash, and they're grateful to China for that. And that is why they say nasty things about India, but they say lovely things about China, despite the fact that China is giving 6 times more money on a conservative count to Russia than India is doing 6 times more, possibly as much as 10, 11 times more if you look at it in different ways. They're doing that. And they are giving a lot of logistical and other help to Russia, which India is not giving at all. Barring a certain amount of pharmaceuticals, Russians are not buying anything from us. Why? They don't want our rupees. Why? Because Uncle Xi has told them, don't accept rupees. Make sure the Indians buy only in RMB. I want the RMB, not the rupee, to rise. So don't accept rupees. And Russia under Putin is obeying Xi. Don't buy anything more than pharmaceuticals. I don't really want you to buy a lot of stuff which is going on in India. I don't want you to be buying from India. And that's what you see. We are buying from Russia a lot of stuff. They're buying very little from us. And the reason is the brakes are on India Russia trade as well. The brakes are on rupee ruble trade as well. They agreed to it. Then they backed away. And the hidden hand is the obvious hand. That was the data points have come to me even from some time ago, about 8 to 10, 11 months ago. Don't ever, I think I wrote one or two pieces about
Yes,
rupee ruble
yes, sir.
trade. Said, don't dream of this. It's not going to happen. Xi Jinping won't make it happen. He doesn't want the rupee to ever become a global currency, which is really happening. So I just want to say very frankly that please, the reality is they are working towards a stalemate. They are creating a stalemate, and in that process, they are working towards a situation where they have a free hand in the Indo-Pacific. Specifically, in my view, I mean, I'm not sure which attack will come first, but one of these two attacks will come first, and both will anyway come. But they want a situation in which NATO is just too exhausted to leap into that conflict. They will leave the country attacked by itself. They may make some declaratory statements. They may give a little bit of shipments of some arms completely too little, too late, but they will not get involved. He is waiting for that point, and he sees the Ukraine war as the perfect mechanism for ensuring that.
Somebody had said at the beginning of this war, sir. I think it was a American analyst, an American retired colonel who said that this war is going to change the world. We will not recognize the world after we come out of this war. What you're actually hinting towards is exactly that, and that's something which is very, very interesting. Sir, I'm going to look forward to, actually, somehow I've not been able to read your article. Normally I keep a track. This one is something that I'm going to read, and I'm going to link it in the description so that a lot many more people read it. It's always insightful talking to you, sir. This is a absolutely brilliant angle that you've brought about, because a lot of us
It's not
did
my
wonder.
angle at all. Not my angle. Data
It's a
points supplied
combination.
to me by about
Yeah,
three
yeah,
dozen people. I'm
of
grateful to
course.
them. I'm just analyzing it, churning it in my mind, going through over it,
Absolutely.
and then and then coming to certain conclusion that this is a credible, very credible uh, assessment.
Possibility. Hmm. Sir, as a matter of fact, we all wondered about the rupee ruble trade, and everybody had this hint about the silent hand, but nobody really put his finger on it. I'm glad you've done so, so that a lot of us junior observers and people who are just getting into this field could actually dig a little deeper into this particular aspect. It's always a pleasure to have leaders in the this thing, giving us a certain direction so that we could also little bit enhance our particular knowledge and see where we can actually learn what we can learn from this situation. So it's always a pleasure and a learning experience talking to you, sir, and I look forward for the next interaction. Till then, sir, Jai Hind.
Namaskar, Jai Hind.